What's up, you guys? My name is Aubrey, this is my channel, and today we're going to be talking about Turo. And I'm going to be breaking down the 5 biggest lessons that I've learned as a Turo host that has been on the platform for 4 years and that has had over 2,000 total trips. So I'm going to be breaking down exactly what I learned, why I learned them, and how you can learn from the exact same lessons as well. So let's get started. Now, I've been on the Turo platform since 2017. I heard about it around this exact same time 4 years ago, and I heard about it from an acquaintance of mine who was using Turo in order to justify their purchase of their expensive Mercedes-Benz. At the time, I had never heard of Turo. The entire concept of it was brand new to me, and if I'm being honest, whenever I first started looking into it, I thought it was a scam. But I started doing my research, I did my due diligence, and my curiosity was sparked by the fact that I had this friend who was supposedly making a lot of money. So I decided to dip my toes into the world of Turo, and I tested it out with my personal car, a 2011 Jeep Wrangler. I sent it out on its first rental, and I knew immediately this is something that I wanted to pursue. Shortly after that, I bought a Toyota Yaris, then I bought a Mercedes-Benz, and then from there, the rest is quite honestly history. Since then, I've purchased so many different cars for Turo. I currently have over a dozen cars listed on the Turo platform alone, and I'm looking to expand my fleet every single day. But with 2,000 trips on the Turo platform, there are a lot of mistakes that I've made over the years, and there are a lot of lessons that I had to learn the hard way, and that's exactly what I want to talk about today. But before we dig into the lessons, if you guys could please do me a huge favor, and if you could hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell for the YouTube algorithm. This helps my YouTube channel grow because it helps let the YouTube algorithm know that you guys are enjoying my content, and then they'll push my content out to new viewers. That way my channel can continue to grow more and more. If you could do that, it would mean a lot, and I would greatly appreciate it. And so with that, let's dig into the very first lesson that I learned, and that is to invest in the right tools and invest in them the first time around. Now, this is something that is very much easier said than done because tools are unfortunately very, very expensive. And when it comes to having a full-fledged Turo shop, you're going to need a lot of tools, and that costs a lot of money. Now, whenever it comes to how I manage my Turo fleet, my fiance HP and I do all of the maintenance ourselves, or at least 99% of it. But whenever we were first starting out, this was particularly tough because we didn't always have the right tools and the right equipment in order to complete the job properly. As a result, we would oftentimes buy cheap tools, or we would have to rent tools from O'Reilly's in order to get the job done. This was fine for the time being and allowed for us to get the job done correctly, but oftentimes these jobs were harder and they took longer than they should have because of the fact that we didn't have the proper tools. And the tools that we did have oftentimes had to be replaced twice as fast because they were just low quality tools. Buying high quality tools has been something that has been a true game changer for our Turo fleet, and it's something that I highly recommend doing if you have the means to do so. Don't simply buy the cheapest tool because you don't want to shell out extra money, because buying high-end tools is absolutely worth it. The second lesson is to detach yourself from your cars. The reality is, whenever you're renting a car on Turo, that car is absolutely going to get abused. It's going to get trashed. People are going to treat it like crap. That is just the reality of the situation, unfortunately. And this is something that I've found true with every single vehicle that I've ever rented out on the Turo platform. So often I see new hosts, and even sometimes older hosts, who host their cars on Turo, and they get genuinely upset whenever their car is returned in less than ideal condition. This is something that ruins their mood. It genuinely makes them upset, and it makes them difficult in order to continue the business further. The reality is, if you want to be successful in Turo, you have to figure out a way to take your emotions out of the equation. Of course, whenever my cars come back damaged, it annoys me. I hate whenever people don't treat my property with respect, and it's something that really can be frustrating. But the reality is, it's part of the business, and if something happens to your vehicle, whether it be damaged, whether it be in an accident, whether it be it just came back trashed, this is something that is unavoidable, and you have to just go with the punches, deal with it, and move on. This is something that is an absolute must if you want to be a Turo host, if you want to scale your Turo business, and if you want to be in Turo long term. Number 3 is that the pennies matter. This is something that is so incredibly important, and it's something that I've talked about on this channel many, many times. The reality is, whenever it comes to Turo, it is all a numbers game. You have to make sure that you're making enough money in order to cover your expenses. But the problem is that whenever it comes to Turo, it's very easy to forget how much in expenses you have each and every month, because Turo provides you with a very handy dandy earnings graph. And far too many hosts look at that earnings graph and think that that is their take-home pay. They look at that and they're like, okay, I made this amount of money for this month. But the reality is that simply isn't true. true. That is the amount of revenue that your car brought in, and is not the profit that your car had at the end of the month. Because whenever it comes to calculating your actual profit, you have to take expenses into the equation as well. You have to take into account depreciation, insurance costs, your time, tolls, and so much more. This is where the pennies can come into play. Now, toll charges are something that you will inevitably have to deal with as a Turo host, and this is something that can sometimes come off as a bit petty, because you will inevitably run into those times where a guest has only gone through 50 cents worth of tolls, and you'll have to ask yourself the question of, is it worth to request reimbursement for 50 cents? And my answer to that will be, every single time, absolutely yes it is. The thing is, whenever we're talking about the pennies in our profit margin, it's not about the individual penny, but it's how that penny compounds on top of other pennies to make a really large amount of money. Let's look at that 50-cent toll example again. If you're looking at one single car and the guest went through a 50-cent toll, sure, 50 cents will not make or break your bank. But what if you have 10 cars and every single day a guest is going through 50 cents worth of tolls? Well, for one day, that is $5 worth of tolls. For 1 month, that's $150. And for one entire year, that's $1,800. That is a whole lot of money, all stemming from one 50-cent toll charge. This is, of course, kind of an extreme example, but it actually isn't that extreme. At least it's not as extreme as you may think. The reality is, Turo pennies can really rack up, whether it comes from depreciation, whether it comes from overage miles, whether it comes from cleaning fees, whether it comes from tolls, whether it comes from gas. There are times that you will have to ask yourself, is it worth it to charge the guest? And the answer to that question should be yes every single time. Even if it's just a couple of dollars in gas, even if it's just a couple of dollars in tolls, if the guest rightfully owes that money, then they should pay it. And it's something that you shouldn't feel bad about asking. And you certainly shouldn't just brush it aside and chalk it up to just being a couple of dollars. Now, next on that same note is reviews and how to ensure that you get that 5-star review. Now, over the years, reviews have become increasingly more and more important on Turo. The reality is there's a lot of hosts on Turo right now, and there are a lot of not so stellar hosts. And as a result, Turo is really quick to kick off hosts that are not being a good representation of the Turo brand. And rightfully so. They should be kicking off hosts that aren't getting good reviews. But because of this, it is incredibly important to make sure that you get good reviews. It's incredibly important to ensure that the guest is having a good experience with your car. Now, a lot of this comes down to really simple things like making sure the car is clean, making sure it's in good condition, making sure that you're communicating with the guest, making sure that you're kind to deal with. All of these things and more will be great ways to ensure a 5-star review. But sometimes there are things that happen that are simply out of your control that may result in a 1-star review. For example, requesting reimbursement from a guest. I cannot tell you how many times over the years I've received a 1 or a 2-star review from a person because of the fact that I requested reimbursement. For example, a guest may have one of my cars, they may have had a great experience, they may have even told me how great the car was, but then they went over in miles, I requested reimbursement for those miles, and as a result, they gave me a 1-star. This is something that happens all the time, and it's something that can have a pretty big impact on your Turo profile, but I'm going to tell you how to avoid this. Now, number one is the fact that Turo recently implemented a policy about retaliatory reviews, which has been incredibly helpful. Basically, how it works is if you get a retaliatory review on your Turo profile and you contact Turo support and you can prove that it was retaliatory in nature, you can actually get that review removed. For example, if a guest went over in miles on my car, I requested reimbursement for those miles, and then the guest left me a 1-star review right after, the timing of that review would be questionable enough to where Turo could actually delete that review for me, thus taking away the impact of it on my profile. But this doesn't work all the time, and the experiences that I've heard have been kind of mixed from different hosts. In all, it depends on what representative is helping you with this review claim. So a secondary tactic that you can pursue is to simply request reimbursement after you get the review. This is something that I've been doing for years because this retaliatory review policy wasn't always in place, and it was up to the host to avoid getting retaliatory reviews altogether. Basically, how this works is whenever a guest returns your car, you want to ask them to review your car as soon as possible. This is especially true if the guest returns your car dirty, or if they went over miles, or if they have any sort of fee associated with the rental. For example, gas fees or toll charges. You have 72 hours to request reimbursement as a Turo host, and the guest has 10 days to review you. So the best tactic is to get the guest to review you as soon as possible. That way they can review you, you can request reimbursement, and your reimbursement request will not impact impact their review. This is something that is really important, and long term, it can have some pretty significant impacts to your Turo profile. Get them to review you before requesting reimbursement. Do not request for reimbursements until after you get a review. If after 72 hours the guest still has not reviewed you, then at that point, I would just simply request for reimbursement, cross your fingers, and hope for the best. But in general, I would discourage you from requesting for reimbursements right after a trip ended, because at that point, it is unlikely that the guest has left you a review yet, and because of that, a request for a reimbursement could potentially impact the review negatively. And lastly is something that I've talked about a lot on this channel, and I will die on this hill. It is something that I am so passionate about, and I believe in it to my core, and that is remote key exchanges will always, and I mean always, be better than meeting guests in person. This is something that I think is so incredibly important, and I will continue to mention it on this channel until the day I die. Whenever it comes to Turo, there are two ways that you can give a guest a key. You have the remote key exchange option, which is basically a remote process that involves a lockbox, and you have the lockbox at the vehicle, and then you have the key in the lockbox that the guest can access at the time of their rental. The second tactic is actually meeting the guest in person and physically handing them the key. These two ways are very different. They require very different amounts of times, and they are very different in scalability. But in my opinion, I think the first one, the remote key exchange, is so much better. It's so much more efficient. It's so much more scalable. It is, in my opinion, the no-brainer route to go down. And it's something that I think every new Turo host should consider. One of the reasons why I think that Turo is so great is because of the fact that I think it's an incredible side hustle. I've been very, very transparent from the beginning of my Turo career and the beginning of my YouTube career that I do not think that Turo is a good standalone business. I would never do Turo full time. I would never rely 100% of my income on my Turo business. But Turo is an incredible side hustle. All in all, my income from Turo makes up about 30% of my total earnings at the end of the year. But whenever it comes to the time commitment for that, it only takes up between 10 and 15% of my time, meaning that the amount of money that I'm making in relation to the amount of time that I'm spending on the hustle is really, really nice. And that's where I think that Turo really thrives. I've been able to do a lot of the things that I've been able to do today because of the fact that my Turo business model is so passive. It's allowed for me to do things like this YouTube channel. It's allowed for me to do things like explore residential real estate. It's allowed for me to do things like work in consulting. If Turo was treated like a full-time 40-hour per week job, it simply would not be worth it. And that's where a remote key exchange comes into play. That's where you can turn it into an incredibly lucrative side hustle rather than a soul-crushing full-time gig. In my opinion, I think going the remote key exchange route is the difference between having an extremely lucrative side hustle and a really soul-crushing 9-to-5. Turo is great. I love it. But if I had to sit around all day waiting for guests to show up, if I had to talk with every single guest that rented one of my cars, if I had to adhere to a guest schedule day in and day out, I would go absolutely insane. It would be incredibly unenjoyable. I would not like it. It would be incredibly frustrating, and it simply wouldn't be sustainable and it wouldn't be scalable. But alternatively, going the remote key exchange route of going the lockbox method rather than meeting my guests in person, it allows for me the flexibility to do other things. It allows for me to scale my business more than I ever would have thought I would have been able to, and it allows for me to do what I want on a day-to-day basis, which for me is looking at other income streams to increase my wealth. All in all, you guys, I wanted to make this video because Turo really isn't rocket science. I think that anybody can be successful at it, but I think there are some key mistakes that too many people make, and these mistakes ultimately end up turning people off of the platform. I think all of the things on my YouTube channel, as well as what I talk about in the car sharing masterclass, are all things that can help you become a more successful Turo host. But these things specifically that I've talked about in this video are some of the harsh lessons that I've learned over the years, and they're lessons that you can really only learn if you have a lot of experience on the Turo platform. Like always, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I'll see you guys in the next video.